The air smelled of pine needles and something softer, maybe lavender. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to believe. I was 23, and the world felt like a glass orb in my hands, slippery and threatening to shatter at any second. It was the summer of 1970. I had just lost my father, and with him, any sense of where I belonged. So I ran. Not from people, not from grief, but from eyes. Everyone kept watching me like I was about to break, and maybe I was. Maybe I already had. Lake Stillwater wasn't much to look at on a map, just a ripple on the edge of upstate New York. But in person, God, it felt like it had been carved out of heaven by someone who needed silence as much as I did. I rented a small green cabin on the far side of the lake, the kind of place that creaked when the wind breathed and sighed when you walked across the floorboards. I wasn't expecting company. In fact, I avoided it. I didn't go to the main lodge except for mail. Didn't answer the door when strangers knocked. But I had forgotten about the broken porch light, and one night when I tripped over the front step and almost cracked my head open, I muttered a few words to the manager at the lodge the next morning. That was when I first heard his name, Jonah Ray. He showed up that afternoon, toolbox in hand, sleeves rolled up to his elbows like a man who didn't mind getting dirty. He didn't say much, just nodded at me once and went to work on the porch light like he already knew exactly what was wrong with it. I watched him from the window, pretending to be reading a book. He worked slowly, methodically, like he was used to fixing broken things, like it mattered to him. When the light flickered on at dusk, he finally spoke. "You'll want to check it again after the next rain. Wiring's old, might act up." His voice didn't match his look. It was deeper, rougher, as if someone had dragged it over gravel. And his eyes, they looked like they remembered things he'd never say out loud. There was pain in them, but not the kind that begged for pity, the kind that dared you to ask. I didn't. Instead, I offered him tea. That night, we sat on the porch long after the bugs claimed the air and the trees hummed with crickets. He told me very little. His name, that he'd grown up not far, that he'd worked jobs like this since he was 16. But his silences said more than his words, and for some strange reason I trusted those silences. That became a pattern. He'd stop by for repairs, real or made up, and we'd sit. Sometimes we talked about books. He liked Steinbeck. I liked Fitzgerald. We argued over Hemingway. Other times we just stared out at the water, watching the moon spill silver across the surface. It was peaceful. But inside me, everything had started to tremble, like a violin string pulled too tight. Every time he stepped close, I felt the warmth of something I wasn't sure I deserved. I was scared, not of him, never of him, but of myself, of what I was beginning to feel. It was too soon after losing my father, too soon to feel anything but numbness. But there he was, making me laugh again, making me feel safe but scared. Funny how safety can be the most dangerous feeling of all. Because once you have it, you'll do anything not to lose it. One night, we danced. There was no music playing, just the rhythm of rain on the tin roof and the soft shuffle of our feet on wooden planks. He twirled me, gentle but sure. His hand rested on my waist like it had always belonged there. I don't remember who leaned in first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But when our lips met, I stopped thinking altogether. From that night forward, he didn't knock anymore. He just came in. I learned little bits of his past, through fragments. He had no family left. He'd done some things he wasn't proud of. I didn't ask for details. It felt like unwrapping a gift too soon. Like whatever he was hiding would come out when it was ready. And maybe it did, in a way I never expected. My birthday came in July. I wasn't planning on celebrating, but he showed up at dawn with pancakes and black coffee. Said nothing until I finished the last bite. Then he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a compass pendant on a leather cord. Old, maybe antique. It still worked. He held it up between his fingers and said only one thing. "It always points home." I didn't cry until he left that night. I touched that compass every morning after that. wore it around my neck like armor. Like maybe it could keep me from getting lost again. But I didn't know what kind of journey was coming. I didn't know that 3 years later I'd be holding that same compass at a graveside, with rain soaking through black wool and mud pulling at my shoes. He told me the compass would always point home. But what if home was buried 6 feet under? Back then, though, none of that had happened yet. Back then, I still believed in simple things. Love, second chances, porch lights that stayed on after storms. Jonah became more than just a visitor. He was my anchor, and for the first time since my father's death, I wasn't drifting. He asked me to marry him the night of the Perseid meteor shower. We were lying on a blanket by the lake, watching streaks of light carve through the sky like fire-dipped arrows. He didn't have a ring. He didn't need one. He just looked over and whispered, "Stay." That was all. One word, and I did. But I wish someone had warned me about the darkness still living inside him, about the truth buried in those haunted eyes, about what happens when you love someone who's spent their whole life hiding from their past. Because no matter how tightly you hold on, some ghosts have a way of slipping through your fingers. And the scariest ghosts? They don't haunt houses. They haunt hearts. Now, all these years later, I still have the compass. Still wear it. Even now, sitting in this dusty old chair, telling you this story. Because part of me still hopes it'll point back to him. Not his grave. Not the cabin. But to the man he could have been, if only the past hadn't come knocking. But that comes later. This was only the beginning. It was late August when the lake began to turn cold, the kind of cold that whispered through the windows before the air itself caught on. The birds changed their tone, the shadows got longer, and Jonah started locking his toolbox. I noticed it the first time when I went to grab a screwdriver to fix a cabinet hinge. Something he usually encouraged me to do myself, said it was empowering. But the box was snapped shut with a brass padlock that hadn't been there before. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone's entitled to secrets. God knows I had mine. But secrets don't stay quiet in houses built of wood and silence. They creak, they settle, they shift, just like people. That night, while Jonah showered, I noticed something strange wedged under the couch cushion. A photo curled at the edges, face down. I almost left it there. Almost. But curiosity is its own kind of betrayal, isn't it? When I flipped it over, my breath stopped. There he was, Jonah, 5 or 6 years younger, standing in front of what looked like a house, somewhere dry and sun-bleached. His arm was around a woman. Dark hair, strong face. She wasn't smiling. And in front of them, a child. A little girl, maybe 5. Blonde curls. Jonah was looking at the camera like he didn't want the photo taken. My fingers trembled. I waited until he stepped into the room, towel around his neck, steam still clinging to his shoulders. "Who is she?" He froze mid-step. He didn't need to ask what I meant. His eyes flicked to the photo in my hand like it was a grenade. "That's not what it looks like," he said quietly. "Then tell me what it is." He sighed, sat down slowly on the arm of the chair. His knuckles were white against the fabric. "She's gone," he said. "It's complicated? Was she your wife?" "No, not really. Jonah." He looked at me then, really looked at me. There was something fractured in his gaze, like a mirror that had been mended but would never be whole again. "She left, took the kid. I don't know where. That was a long time ago." I wanted to believe him. I did, but something in his voice. It wasn't just sadness. It was fear. Or guilt. Or both. I didn't press. Not that night. But a crack had formed. And once you see a fracture, it's hard to stop checking for others. Secrets have a weight. And once they start to surface, you don't get to decide what stays buried. It started the next week. His sleepwalking. The first time I found him standing barefoot in the backyard at 3 a.m., staring into the trees. His eyes were open but blank, like he was looking through the world instead of at it. "Jonah," I whispered, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" He turned slowly, like a puppet on strings. "They never found the second body," he mumbled. "What?" But he didn't answer, just walked past me back inside, and got into bed like nothing had happened. In the morning, he didn't remember a thing. The second time, he stood by the lake, whispering something over and over. She said she'd never tell. She said she'd never tell. When I tried to wake him, he flinched, hard, like I'd struck him, and for a moment his eyes didn't recognize me. "You were screaming," I said the next day. He rubbed his face. "Bad dreams." "About who?" He didn't answer. The air between us grew colder than the lake water. I tried to tell myself it was grief, or trauma, or the ghosts we all carry, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living with someone whose life was half missing, like I'd moved into a house without realizing the foundation had been built over bones. If my story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts before I go on. Then came the neighbor. Her name was Ida, old as dust, lived 2 cabins down, always sitting on her porch like a gargoyle in a shawl. One afternoon, I brought her soup, an attempt to be neighborly, and honestly, to get out of my own head. We chatted about the weather, the loons on the lake, then she squinted at me and asked, "Is that feller of yours still working at the lodge?" I blinked. "Jonah." She nodded. "He helped me with a broken pipe last month. Quiet one." I felt the hair on my arms rise. "Last month?" She laughed. "Yeah, end of May, I think. Saw him here a few times before the 4th, but Jonah had told me he arrived in July. I met him on the porch July 2nd. He said it was his first week. Something wasn't right. When I asked him about it that night, his face was unreadable. I stopped by earlier in the season, just to help out. I wasn't staying yet. But why didn't you say that?" He shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered." But it did. Every inconsistency mattered. Every lie, big or small, was like a loose thread, and I was already tugging. Sometimes the past doesn't knock on your door. It slips in through a crack and waits until you're asleep. The worst came one morning in September. I woke to find the house too quiet. Jonah was gone. I checked the kitchen, the porch, the lake. No sign of him. But when I stepped back inside, my blood turned to ice. There, hanging from the bedroom doorknob, was my compass pendant. Only I hadn't taken it off, not once. Not even in the shower. My fingers went to my neck and found only skin. I looked again. Yes, there it was, gently swaying from the doorknob, as if someone had just placed it there. I snatched it up, trembling. When Jonah came back that morning, I asked him, trying to sound calm, "Did you take off my necklace?" He frowned. "What?" "No, why would I? It was on the doorknob." He blinked, confused. "You must have taken it off in your sleep." "No, I didn't." He said nothing, just walked past me, face unreadable. Later that night, I caught him staring at it while I made tea, staring like it meant more to him than I realized. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He hesitated. "That compass," he said slowly. "It belonged to someone else once. Before I gave it to you." I paused, heart beginning to race. "Who?" He looked up at me, eyes dark as the lake at night. "My daughter." That was the first time he said the word. Daughter. And in that moment I realized I didn't know who I was living with, but I was about to find out. The wind had a different voice that week. It no longer sang through the trees. It whispered, coiled, hissed, like it knew something I didn't. I kept thinking it was the lake's way of warning me. Or maybe I was just looking for meaning in the cracks that were starting to form around my life. It was a Tuesday when Clara arrived. She pulled up in a silver Mercedes, polished to the point it reflected the whole damn forest. I was on the porch reading when she stepped out, heels crunching on gravel, a white scarf wrapped tight around her neck like a noose made of silk. She moved like she didn't belong in a place like Stillwater, like the woods were beneath her. But she wasn't lost. No, she knew exactly where she was going. "Is Jonah here?" she asked like she already knew he was. Her voice, low, clipped, cultured. Everything about her was clean lines and sharper edges. "Who's asking?" I said, folding my book. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. his sister. I remember thinking, he never mentioned a sister. Before I could respond, Jonah stepped out onto the porch behind me. I felt his body tense before I even turned around. "Clara," he said flatly. "Brother," she returned, voice dipped in some kind of mockery I couldn't quite place. They stared at each other like they were measuring something between them, something heavy and ugly. "Well," she said, finally looking at me. "So this is her. You're sweet. Thank you," I said, unsure whether it was a compliment. Clara tilted her head slightly. "He likes sweet, but sugar attracts flies, and just like that the temperature dropped 10 degrees. You never really know a person until someone who knows their past walks through your front door." She stayed the night, not that Jonah offered. She simply brought her own bag inside and made herself comfortable in the guest room. She said she was passing through, but something about her felt permanent, like a stain you couldn't scrub out. Jonah barely spoke during dinner. He picked at his food. Didn't meet my eyes. I tried to make conversation, asked Clara about where she lived, what she did. She gave vague answers, redirected everything back to Jonah. "We were close once," she said softly. "But grief changes people, doesn't it, Ellie?" I froze. "Grief?" She didn't elaborate, just smiled and sipped her wine. That night I found Jonah in the basement. The door was always locked now, but I caught it open just long enough to see him inside, standing over something covered with a tarp. He shut it when he saw me, locked it, didn't speak. Things got stranger after that. Jonah wouldn't let me go into town alone anymore. He said it was dangerous, that there'd been break-ins. But Stillwater hadn't seen a crime in years, and we both knew it. He started checking the locks 3 times each night, avoiding mirrors, talking less. And when he did talk, it was like his words were rehearsed. Too clean, too careful. Clara, on the other hand, wandered the house like it belonged to her. One morning, I found her by the window reading a weathered notebook. It looked familiar. Leather-bound, cracked at the spine. Jonah's initials were carved into the cover. I stepped closer. "What's that?" She didn't look up. "Just tracking loose ends." "What does that mean?" She finally met my eyes. "You'll understand, eventually." That night I went looking for the notebook. Jonah had hidden it. I searched the whole cabin, under the floorboards, behind books, inside vents. Nothing. But the next morning, I found it again, on Clara's bed, open to a page that read, "She lied, and lies rot. Even underwater, the ink was smeared as if someone had cried over it. The past doesn't knock politely. It breaks in, sits at your table, and waits for you to notice what's missing." Things came to a head 3 days later. Clara and Jonah argued on the dock. I heard shouting through the trees. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. Accusation, fury, something splintering. Then, silence. I waited, watched. Only Jonah came back. He walked into the cabin, hair wind-blown, eyes glassy. He poured himself a drink and downed it in one go. "Where's Clara?" I asked. "She left early." I blinked. "But her car's still outside." "She's getting it towed later," he said, not looking at me. The answer was too fast, too smooth. I went outside. Her car was locked. Inside, her purse sat on the passenger seat. No suitcase, no keys. I walked back in, heart hammering. "Jonah," I said slowly, "did you hurt her?" He turned to me then, and for the first time, I couldn't read his face at all. "She was always good at disappearing," he said. "Even as a child." He smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I used to think monsters hid under beds. But the real ones, they make you breakfast. They kiss your forehead. They tell you you're safe, while hiding a truth that could destroy you. That night, I couldn't sleep. The compass was missing again. So was the notebook. And when I finally drifted off, I dreamt of the lake. still and black, and something floating just beneath the surface. Hair, fabric, fingers reaching, and Clara's voice, whispering through the trees. "You're sweet, Ellie, but even sugar can drown." I woke gasping, and Jonah wasn't in bed. The day we got married, it felt like the whole world had been put on pause. Just for us. No thunderclouds, no secrets clawing at the door, no eyes watching from the trees. Just a sliver of sunlight breaking through the canopy. And Jonah standing there in a navy suit that didn't quite fit, his hands trembling as I walked toward him barefoot, on pine needles and promise. We kept it small, just the lodge manager, an old woman named Dolores, who agreed to sign as our witness, and a man from town who officiated with a Bible that looked older than the lake itself. No music, no guests, just wind and vows, and the two of us pretending we'd outrun the shadows. Jonah cried when he said, "I do." Real tears. Not loud, not performative. Just a quiet kind of shaking that told me something inside him was breaking open. Or maybe breaking down. I reached up, wiped the tear with my thumb, and whispered, "This is love. Messy, broken, beautiful." That was what I told myself. Because if I didn't believe that, what was I doing? Sometimes the scariest kind of love is the one that makes you ignore every single red flag. Because you want it to be real so badly, you're willing to bleed for the illusion. We spent our honeymoon right there at the cabin. No beach, no city, no passport stamps. Just us. It rained that week. The lake swelled and sighed, and the house creaked more than usual. Jonah made pancakes every morning. He started lighting candles before dinner. There were quiet smiles, lingering touches, and for a moment it felt like peace. But peace, I've learned, is often just silence before the scream. On our wedding night, Jonah handed me a gift. A photo album wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. "I made this," he said. The first page was us. Our first night stargazing, our kitchen dance. A Polaroid of me half asleep with a book in my lap. Photos I didn't know he'd taken. Photos that made me ache. But as I turned the pages, something shifted. The photo stopped around the halfway point. The second half of the album was blank, except for one photo. Glued upside down, I hesitated. Turned the book. Looked. It was a picture of Jonah, younger. The past. It has a way of whispering back to us. If you'd like to hear its voice again, hit that subscribe button. Standing in front of a different cabin, not ours. In the background, there was a swing set, half collapsed, and just at the edge of the frame, a child's shoe. Dirty, abandoned. I looked up. "What is this?" He smiled faintly. "Just old memories." "Why is it upside down?" "So I don't have to look at it." That night, I didn't sleep well. I heard movement around midnight, soft footsteps on gravel. I watched through the window as Jonah walked into the backyard, shirtless, barefoot, carrying a box. He knelt beside the fire pit and poured something over its contents, liquid that caught the light. When he lit it, the flames shot high, then low, then hissed. I stepped outside, silently. He didn't hear me at first. "Jonah," I whispered. He jumped, turned. "It's nothing," he said too quickly. "Just burning old things." I walked closer. The smoke didn't smell like wood or paper. It smelled like bleach. And something else, something like hair. "What was in the box?" I asked. "Does it matter?" he said, then softer. "I just want to move on." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed around the smoke. And something else, a rising panic I couldn't swallow. We tell ourselves people change, that fire can cleanse, but some things, some truths, don't burn. They bury themselves deeper. When I returned to the bedroom that night, my heart was still racing. I found the lights off, the window open, the air colder than it should have been, and something on the pillow, Clara's notebook. I hadn't seen it since she vanished. I hadn't dared to ask about it again. Now it lay open. The pages fluttered in the wind. I stepped closer. There, in looping, erratic ink, one sentence stretched across the open spread. She never left. You're just not digging deep enough. My hands shook. I sat down slowly. The page smelled faintly of soil. There was something else, a smear, reddish-brown, on the corner of the paper. Blood? Dirt, both? I heard Jonah's footsteps behind me and quickly shut the book, tucking it under the pillow. He didn't ask what I was doing. He just climbed into bed, turned away from me and exhaled like a man who had just buried something. Maybe someone. The scariest part isn't realizing someone might be lying to you. It's realizing they might be telling the truth. And it's worse than any lie you could imagine. I didn't sleep. Again. I lay there, staring at the blank half of the photo album, the words in Clara's notebook echoing in my skull like a curse. She never left. And suddenly, the forest didn't feel like shelter anymore. It felt like a graveyard. And I didn't know how many names were carved in the roots beneath our feet. But I was beginning to understand. One of them might be Clara's, and the other might be mine. The rain had been falling for hours, thick, relentless sheets pounding the roof like fists. Thunder cracked across the lake like it was trying to split the world in half, and somewhere deep inside the walls of the cabin, something creaked. It wasn't the usual kind of creak. It was a door, the basement door. I froze in the kitchen, spoon half raised to my mouth. I hadn't heard Jonah open it, hadn't seen him go downstairs. But there it was, just slightly ajar. A breath of cool air slipping out from the dark behind it, carrying with it the faint scent of mildew and something else. Something I couldn't name but made my stomach twist. I should have waited, should have turned around, called someone, done anything but what I did. But when your world is already cracked open, a little more darkness doesn't scare you. It dares you. So I picked up the flashlight and descended. The stairs groaned beneath me, each step groaning like it was trying to warn me off. Dust floated in the beam of light. The air grew heavier with every foot I dropped, until I couldn't tell if it was humidity or dread making my skin. Damp. The basement was bigger than I'd realized. Longer. The kind of space that felt like it had never truly ended, just faded into shadow. I passed shelves of tools, paint cans, forgotten jars. Then I saw them. Boxes. 4 of them. Neat, labeled. The first one I opened held clothes. Women's. Folded carefully. Too carefully. Sweaters. Blouses. Silk scarf that smelled like perfume long since. Faded. The second box was worse. Hairbrushes. Each one had a name taped to. It Renee, Sarah, Ellen. The hair still clung to the bristles. My hands shook as I picked up one labeled Lindsay. And something in me turned ice cold. That name. I knew that name. I stumbled back up the stairs, crashing into walls, knocking over a bucket, desperate to reach the light, to escape. I burst into the kitchen, gasping, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Jonah was there, sitting at the table, waiting. It's one thing to suspect someone is hiding something. It's another to walk into the room where they keep their monsters. I couldn't speak at first. Couldn't breathe. He looked at me. Calm. Not angry. Not scared. Just disappointed. You shouldn't have gone down there, he said quietly. My voice came out as a whisper. Who are they? He didn't answer. What happened to them, Jonah? He stared at the glass in his hands, turned it slowly. Then, in a voice low enough to drown in, not everything is meant to be remembered. That night, I locked the bedroom door, slept with a knife under the pillow, or tried to sleep. I kept waking up thinking I heard footsteps pacing below the floorboards. The storm outside hadn't let up, but the real thunder was inside me, rolling, crashing, warning. Around 2:14 a.m., the phone rang. Not my cell. The landline, an old rotary model we barely used. I hadn't even realized it was still connected. I stared at it for a long moment, my hand hovering above the receiver. Then I picked it up. "Hello?" Silence. Then a breath. And then a woman's voice. "Dry, cracked, close. He buries the lies," she whispered. "Not the truth." I clutched the phone tighter. "Who is this?" Her breath hitched. "Find the orchard." Click! The line went dead. It wasn't the words that chilled me. It was the certainty in her voice, as if she hadn't just called to warn me. She'd called to prepare me. I stood there for what felt like an hour, phone still in my hand, the dial tone hissing like a snake in my ear. The orchard. I knew of one, about a mile past the trailhead behind the lodge. Old, overgrown, half forgotten. No one went there anymore. Too many bees. Too many stories. Jonah had mentioned it once, vaguely, in passing. Used to be fruit trees back there. He'd said, but they rotted. No one ever cleared them out. I put the phone down, walked back to the bedroom. Jonah was asleep, or pretending to be. I climbed into bed slowly, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind, my mind replaying everything I'd seen. The boxes, the names, the hairbrushes, that picture in the album, glued upside down, the smell of bleach in the fire. Clara's notebook. She never left. That sentence looped in my head like a curse. She never left. Sometimes the answers aren't hidden in the dark. They're buried just beneath your feet, waiting for you to dig, waiting for you to remember. I lay there for the rest of the night, eyes wide, watching the shadows crawl across the walls, because now I knew. The basement wasn't the end of the story. It was just the doorway. The orchard was where the truth had been planted. And whatever had taken root there, it was still growing. The drive to Pennsylvania felt like threading a needle through a storm. Every turn off the interstate, every narrowing road through the thickening woods. It all felt too intentional, too quiet, like the trees themselves had grown in to hide something the world had tried to forget. I found the orchard just past a rusted fence line outside a town no one talks about anymore. The sign had long since rotted off its post, the only remaining marker a cluster of gnarled apple trees, bowing under the weight of neglect. Their fruit had fallen and blackened into the dirt. Sour, rotting things that swarmed with flies and silence. The barn stood crooked at the edge of the grove, not ruined exactly, but surrendered. Its roof sagged, one door hung by a single hinge. The wind moved through it like a breath that hadn't decided whether to whisper or scream. I stepped inside, and instantly I knew this was not just a barn. It was a grave. The air was thick with the scent of mold and rust. Dust motes swirled in my flashlight beam like ash. Then I saw the shoes, rows of them, small, scuffed, faded pinks and blues and purples, some with little cartoon characters, some with dried mud still caked on the soles, each pair neatly placed beneath a beam, like they'd been lined up by someone who cared about order, or ritual. Next to the shoes, dolls, toys, ribbons. And above them, nailed to the wooden wall in a grid of yellowed tape, photos. Dozens of them. Children. Girls. Most were smiling. But every single one had their eyes scratched out. Some violently, gouged with what looked like keys or nails. Others more precise, razor cuts, like someone had taken their time. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to hurt. They wanted to erase. This wasn't about hiding evidence. It was about rewriting memory, one scar at a time. I was still frozen there when I heard a car approach. Old engine, gravel under tired wheels. A silver sedan pulled up behind my rental. An older man stepped out, raincoat flapping around his legs, a cane in one hand. He looked like someone who'd once carried authority but now just carried ghosts. "Ellie Whitmore?" he asked, voice gravel soft. I nodded, heart pounding. He held up a weathered badge. Detective Melrose. Retired. Been waiting a long time for someone to come back here. I followed him outside, away from the barn, away from the photos that had begun to pulse in my vision like open wounds. We sat on the tailgate of his car. He handed me a thermos of black coffee without asking if I wanted any. "The Orchard Girls," he said after a long silence. "That's what the papers called them. Back when we still had a paper. 2001 to 2008. 6 girls. Maybe more. No bodies. No confessions. No arrests." My throat felt like sandpaper. "Did you ever have a suspect?" He shook his head. "Too careful. No fingerprints. No witnesses. But there were patterns. Always young women. Always within a 100-mile radius. Always. Sweet girls. Kind. The sort of girls that would trust a man who looked like he needed help." My heart twisted. "He?" Melrose gave me a long look. "We never caught a name, but we had a sketch. From a survivor." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Yellowed. Water-stained. He opened it and slid the page toward me. A police sketch. Black and white. Sharp cheekbones. Deep-set eyes. A cleft chin. It wasn't Jonah, but it was Jonah. I stared at it. Breath locked in my lungs. "No," I whispered. "That's not... His name is Jonah Ray." Melrose shook his head slowly. "Not unless he changed it." He tapped the bottom corner of the sketch where the name was typed in faded ink. "Noah Tierney. You think you know the person sleeping next to you. You think a name is a truth. But some people wear identities like masks and change them when the mirrors get too honest." I felt sick. My hands went cold. My mind tried to rearrange the past like a jigsaw puzzle with the wrong picture on the box. Noah Tierney. Who was that? Who had I married? Melrose lit a cigarette with trembling fingers as if he needed the smoke more than air. "I looked for him for years," he said. Then the case went cold. Funding dried up. Department politics. You know the rest. I couldn't. My whole body was still inside that barn, surrounded by ghosts that had names I didn't know but felt tethered to me now. Thought of the hairbrushes, the burned box, the picture glued upside down, and Clara, who had warned me. Clara, who had vanished. She never left. "You're just not digging deep enough." I turned to Melrose, voice barely more than a rasp. "If he's Noah Tierney, where did Jonah Ray come from?" Melrose sighed. "No record of that name until 6 years ago. No driver's license. No birth certificate. Just appeared. Like a ghost wearing borrowed skin." He stubbed out the cigarette and handed me the sketch. "You sure you're safe with him?" I looked down at the drawing, at the man I had kissed, slept beside, married. No, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The man I loved didn't exist, but the things he'd done, the girls, the lies, the orchard, they were real, and now they were following me home. I got in my car. I drove without thinking. Back toward the cabin. Back toward the storm. Because I had to know. If I was the next page in that photo album, or the final one. I had driven back to the cabin in a haze, the weight of Melrose's words pressing on me like a physical force. Noah Tierney, a name I'd never heard before. Yet it felt like a truth clawing its way to the surface. The sketch of his face, so similar to Jonah's, only deepened the horror gnawing at me. But when I'd pulled into the driveway, Jonah had been waiting for me on the porch, just standing there under the flickering porch light, like nothing had changed. The world felt different now. The house felt different. The silence, the space between us. Everything was heavy. Suspicious. I walked inside, Jonah watching me with his unreadable gaze. His eyes flickered, and for a moment, I saw something there. Fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that careful calm. He opened his mouth before I could speak. "Ellie, listen, I know you have questions." I nodded, throat dry. My hands clenched at my sides. "You owe me answers," he sighed, rubbing his forehead. He looked older, weary, as if the act of pretending to be someone else had aged him 10 years in the span of a few days. "Jonah Ray," he began, his voice thick with something I couldn't place. was just a name I picked. After I left, after the fire, I didn't want to be anyone but me. I didn't want to remember what I'd left behind. I blinked, trying to keep my focus. The fire? Foster home, he muttered. It was a bad place. I left, I ran, and somewhere along the way I just became Jonah. But the truth is, I'm not him. I never was. Then who are you? The words tasted bitter on my tongue. I'm not Noah Tierney, he said quickly, voice shaking. I swear, that wasn't me. That was someone else. Someone they framed me for. But there was something about the way he said it, like he wanted me to believe him, but his words didn't carry the weight of truth. No weight at all. I opened my mouth to ask about the basement, the photos, the shoes, the names. But before I could, he snapped, "You don't know what you're asking. You don't understand. You don't get to tell me that," I hissed, stepping forward. "What about the photos, Jonah? What about the basement? The hairbrushes? Those names?" He stared at me, his face hollow, distant. "Ellie, please. You have to trust me." But the more I looked at him, the less I believed. He was a stranger wearing someone else's skin. No, he wasn't just a stranger, he was a ghost. It's funny how you can love someone and still have no idea who they really are. I thought I knew Jonah, but now I was starting to think I'd never known him at all. I turned away from him, my pulse racing. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just living in a house. I was living in a tomb. That night, I woke up with the smell of dampness thick in my nostrils. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the windows. But it wasn't the storm that made my heart freeze in my chest. It was the mirror. I woke to find blood smeared across it. Red, dark, and in the center, a phrase carved into the condensation. "You married a ghost." My stomach churned. I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing. This wasn't just some random incident. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. But who had written it? And why now? I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the blood, my reflection a blur in the glass. My heart pounded louder than the rain. The hardest thing about living with a lie is when it starts writing itself in your own blood. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. Instead, I started watching Jonah, watching myself, watching everything. I began recording our conversations on my phone. I'd slip my journal under the bed at night, jotting down notes, tracking his movements. I paid attention to the smallest details. The way he rubbed his hands together when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he kept avoiding the mirrors. How he never stayed in one place too long. One morning, as the sun was still trying to break through the clouds, I followed him. I stayed at a distance, hidden behind the trees, my breath shallow, my heart beating so loud I thought he'd hear it. He was digging, bare hands in the earth, carving a hole in the ground like he was planting something. No tools, no shovel, just his hands, moving quickly, determined. I watched as he paused, wiped his brow with the back of his hand, and then smiled. "Just planting roots," he said, as if he'd known I was there all along. He wasn't digging to bury something. He was planting it, and I didn't know if I was the seed or the soil. I stood there, frozen, my mind spinning. Was this just another lie? Or was there something in the ground? Something that had to be hidden? I walked back to the house without him seeing me, my hands trembling. The fear had started to creep back in. Fear that wasn't just about Jonah. Fear that it was about me, about what I might find. Whatever he was planting, I had to stop it before it grew, before it swallowed us both whole. The dead don't lie. At least, that's what I told myself as I stood beside the crooked fence at the edge of the orchard, watching men in state uniforms dig into soil that hadn't been touched in over a decade. Their movements were slow, careful. The ground was heavy with history, and something darker, something that didn't want to be uncovered. Detective Melrose stood beside me, silent, his eyes fixed on the dirt, not blinking. He didn't need to say it. but I could feel it radiating off him. He knew we weren't ready for what we were about to find. The body had been buried in a makeshift grave beneath a collapsed apple tree, marked only by an X carved into the bark, now nearly grown over. The lead had come from a long-forgotten report buried in local archives, a property maintenance log that listed an unusual sinkhole near the orchard's northwest quadrant. But this wasn't a sinkhole. This was a secret. Someone had once buried and hoped the earth would keep. The remains were fragile, but unmistakably human. A child's dress still clung to brittle bone, blonde hair preserved in mud. We all thought the same thing. One of the orchard girls. Another lost victim finally coming home. Except the DNA came back different. It wasn't her. It wasn't any of the missing girls. It was Clara. Or rather, the real Clara. She'd been dead for over 6 years, which meant the woman who showed up at the cabin, the one who warned me, watched me, read Jonah's notebook. She wasn't Clara at all. She was a ghost in human skin. You think you're chasing answers, but sometimes the answers are chasing you. And when they catch up, they don't ask permission to ruin your life. I couldn't breathe when Melrose told me. His hands trembled as he read the autopsy report aloud, his voice low and flat. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. Time of death: estimated 2017. I whispered the words like they belonged to someone else. But I saw her. I talked to her. Every story I tell is a piece of my heart. If you'd like to keep listening, just tap that subscribe button, dear. You did, he said. Then who was she? He shook his head slowly. Someone playing a very long game. We sat in silence for a while after that. The wind in the orchard didn't feel like wind anymore. It felt like breath, watching us, waiting. I drove home in a daze. The world outside my windshield blurred, like it didn't want me to see where I was going anymore, like it wanted me to stay lost. When I got back to the cabin, I found the mailbox flag raised. We hadn't received mail in weeks. Not since Jonah told the post office to forward everything to a P.O. box. I'd never seen. Inside was a plain white envelope, no return address, no handwriting, just one photograph. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. The edges of the image were slightly curled, and the glossy finish was worn like it had been handled too many times. It was a picture of me and Jonah, in bed, sleeping, his arm draped over me, my head curled into his shoulder. The timestamp in the corner read, 4 days before we met. It's one thing to find out your husband lied about his name. It's another to find out someone was watching you, before your story even started. I dropped the photo, stumbled back like it had burned me. The room spun. I remembered our first meeting, me, alone on the porch, and Jonah offering to fix the broken light. He smiled like he didn't know me, spoke like it was our first conversation. But someone had taken this photo before that day. He'd already been in the house, in my bed. Was he watching me? Had he staged the entire thing, or worse? Was I the one who'd been sleeping through everything? I locked every door, pulled every curtain tight, heart pounding like a drum in a burning church. I checked my phone. No signal. Checked the security cameras Jonah had installed months ago. Blank feed. No history. Nothing. Erased. Like he knew this day would come. Like he was preparing for it. Like he wanted me just paranoid enough. And now, the one person who could have warned me, Clara, was just another name in the dirt. Dead before we ever met. So who had I been talking to? Who had worn her face? Truth isn't a light you flip on. It's a fuse, burning silently through the walls of your life until it reaches the dynamite. And when it blows, you're not the same person who lit it. That night, I sat in the hallway with my back to the door, clutching the photograph like it held the last thread of my sanity. I wasn't just married to a stranger. I was part of something much older, much deeper, and someone, him, or whoever else was pulling the strings, Wasn't done yet. They'd buried Clara. But what else had they buried that I hadn't found? What else had I slept through? And worse, what if the photo wasn't just a memory? What if it was a warning? Because in it, we weren't just sleeping. We were vulnerable, wide open, like someone had been standing over us with a camera. And maybe, just maybe, with something else. The day I finally decided to go to the authorities, I thought it would be a relief. Finally, someone who could see what was happening, who could see Jonah for what he really was. I thought the truth would crack the ground wide open, like a seed finally sprouting after years of being buried. But what I didn't anticipate was how the world would change once the truth left my hands. I gathered everything. The photo of me and Jonah sleeping, the items from the basement, Clara's notebook, and my journal. I made copies of the police sketches, the autopsy reports. It was more than enough to raise questions. It had to be. I had proof. I marched into the station with my head held high, the weight of everything I'd uncovered pulling my shoulders back. I handed over the pile, each page a piece of my unraveling life. The officer at the desk didn't even look at me as I spoke, his gaze fixed on the stack I handed him. "Is this all?" he asked, barely lifting his eyes. "Yes," I said, my voice strained with the hope I was too terrified to believe. "Please, you have to investigate." "He's gone." Jonah's disappeared. "He's not who he says he is." The officer gave a dry, dismissive grunt, then handed it off to someone else. I waited. Hours passed. The silence was suffocating. Finally, the detective handling my case walked in with a furrowed brow, holding the files. "We've been through this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't have enough to go on." "But the photo," I started to argue. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore, but there's no evidence of foul play, no solid leads. Your husband's been here, he's been in the system, and there's nothing suspicious. He was just a man who needed a second chance." The words crushed me. They dismissed me like a broken toy, told me I was delusional. I wasn't even allowed to mourn. I was just the grieving widow in a twisted fairy tale, wrapped in her own delusions. In the end, when you present the truth and they don't see it, it feels like you've bled out in front of them, and they just keep telling you to get up. The world doesn't owe you understanding. The very next day, Jonah vanished. Vanished without a trace. His clothes, his shoes, even his toothbrush, gone. His car wasn't in the driveway. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard a thing. It was like he'd never existed, like his entire life had been constructed just to disappear the moment the truth started to catch up with him. I didn't know where to turn anymore. But the media knew where to turn, and it wasn't to the truth. They called me paranoid. They called me delusional. They said my grief was creating a story, that I was grasping for something to explain the loss. The headline read, "A marriage built on fairy tales and fear." I wasn't just grieving the loss of Jonah. I was grieving the loss of my own sanity. They turned my search for the truth into a spectacle, a show of weakness. Each new reporter that came to my door was another echo of what I was losing. My dignity, my credibility. My world was crumbling in real time. I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. That's when Adrian Gray found me. He was a journalist, rough around the edges, with a sharpness in his eyes that told me he wasn't just some weekend reporter. He had an intensity about him that was unsettling, like he was too close to something dangerous. "I've been tracking him for years," he said, his voice steady and calculated like he already knew everything. "Jonah," I whispered, as if saying his name would make everything real again. "No," Adrian said, shaking his head. "He's not who you think he is. He's part of a much bigger story. He's been running for years, leaving a trail of chaos behind him." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He handed me a folder, thick like it had been handled too many times. Inside were clippings, photographs, and articles from different places across the country, each one connected by a single thread. Noah Tierney. He's been part of a cult, multiple states, multiple aliases, all centered around mind control, deception, and manipulation. A network of people moving under different names, but they all share one thing. This man. He dropped a photo on the table. I looked down, and my heart froze. There he was. Jonah. No, Noah. The same man. The same haunted eyes. The same face I'd woken up to every day for the past 2 years. But this was no candid photo. No quiet moment shared between lovers. This was a picture taken at a cult gathering. A man leading a sermon surrounded by others with vacant eyes. He was wearing the same shirt he'd worn on our wedding day. The same shirt I'd watched him wear when he swore his vows. The worst part of uncovering a lie is realizing it wasn't just your lie. It was someone else's. And they were controlling the story all along. I stared at the image, feeling the floor shift beneath me. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This isn't possible. It is, Adrian replied quietly, his gaze not leaving mine. This man isn't just hiding from you. He's hiding from a past you haven't even begun to understand. And the cult, it's not done with him. And it's not done with you. I sat back, the weight of his words pressing against me like I was drowning in a sea of half-finished truths. My husband, the man I thought I knew, had been leading a double life. He was never just Jonah Ray. He was someone else entirely. Someone who had been part of something dark, something designed to erase the very essence of who he was, and replace it with something unrecognizable. I wasn't just married to a stranger. I was married to a ghost. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was this. I had no idea who I had really been living with all this time. The sun hung low that day, casting long shadows over the gravesite as I stood in front of a black coffin. Empty, as hollow as the life I had lived in the years Jonah had been gone. 3 years, 3 long years since that summer by the lake, when I first let myself fall in love with a man I thought I knew. A man who had shattered every illusion I ever had about trust and truth. They buried him with the usual ceremony, the kind people expect after years of grief. Polite, restrained, like we were all waiting for the end to make sense. People whispered around me, their voices thin and cold, their condolences perfunctory. They said I was strong for holding up so well. Moving on, they called it. They thought I had already buried the past. They thought that the coffin in the ground was the end of the story. But I knew better. I stood by the grave with the strange sensation that something still lingered watching me. Something just out of sight, just beyond the edges of the crowd. Something that had never fully let go of me. Something that wasn't finished yet. I'm curious. How would you have reacted if this happened to you? Leave me a note below. They say the dead leave behind memories. But sometimes they leave something darker, something that follows you, even after the earth swallows them whole. And in that moment, standing over that empty box, I felt like I was the one being buried, not Jonah. The ceremony was over before I knew it, the crowd dispersing as people retreated to the safety of their own lives. But I stayed. I stayed by that grave longer than I should have, holding on to a feeling I couldn't explain. It was like the air itself had turned colder, tighter. Like the world was holding its breath. And then I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the cemetery, half hidden by the trees, her figure sharp against the backdrop of the fading light. She was tall, elegant in a way that felt off, like she belonged in a different time, a different world. But it was the compass she held in her hand that caught my attention. It gleamed in the twilight, the needle spinning in place, as if it were pointing toward something only she could see. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, and she was gone, just like that. Vanished into the air, as though she had never been there at all. You think you can bury the past, but the past has a funny way of resurrecting itself. Especially when you least expect it. And just like that, when I turned my back, I knew it wasn't over. It could never be over. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees broke my reverie, and I felt my legs shake beneath me. I needed to go. I needed to leave before I became part of whatever haunted this place. But before I turned to leave, I saw it. It was on the ground, placed gently on the gravestone at the foot of the coffin. A letter. My breath caught. It was in the typewriter paper I knew so well. The one Jonah had bought me when we first moved into the cabin. The one I used to write about him, to write about us. I bent down, hands trembling, and picked it up. No envelope, no address. Just a message. Sometimes love is the most elegant lie, and sometimes the lie becomes the only truth you trust. I held the paper in my hands, the words like a chain pulling tighter and tighter around my chest. The weight of them crushed me. I thought I knew Jonah. I thought I had finally understood the shape of the lie that had consumed my life, the man I had loved. But this was something else. A truth wrapped in the kind of love that had never been about me at all. It had always been about a game, a lie, an illusion crafted just for me. But even as I stood there, reading the final words he had left, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had never truly buried him. There's a difference between letting someone go and forgetting them. Sometimes the hardest part of grief isn't the loss. It's the sense that you might never be able to escape what they left behind. The letter burned a hole in my hands. I stood there for what felt like hours, but the sun had already dipped beneath the horizon, leaving only the soft rustle of the wind to keep me company. When I finally looked up, I saw her again, the woman from before. She was closer now, just a few feet away, standing beside the grave with the compass still in her hand. Her eyes locked onto mine with a quiet intensity, like she knew more than I could ever hope to understand. And then, before I could speak, before I could move, she disappeared. Just like Jonah, just like everything else. Gone. But the compass stayed. It was sitting there, discarded, on the ground next to the grave, where Jonah had been laid to rest. I knew without a doubt it was hers. The woman who wasn't there and yet always was. I reached down, my fingers brushing the cool metal of the compass. It felt oddly familiar, like it belonged to me in some strange, forgotten way. The compass always points home. But what happens when home isn't where you thought it was? What happens when the past you buried finds a way to bring you back? The lake house stood silent, a relic frozen in time. When I pushed open the creaking door, a cold wave of memories crashed over me. Memories I'd tried so desperately to lock away. The air inside was thick with dust and forgotten secrets. Wallpaper peeled from the walls like shedding skin, revealing something beneath, something darker. I ran my fingers over the exposed plaster, and that's when I saw them. Strange carvings etched deep into the wood behind the wallpaper. Numbers, initials, coordinates, scratched with a frantic desperation that made my skin crawl. They weren't random. They were a message, a map, a warning. My heart pounded as I traced the strange symbols, each one a whisper from the past that refused to be silent. The compass Jonah gave me, the one that always pointed home, lay heavy in my palm. But something was wrong. The needle spun wildly, as if it was lost, confused, or trying to tell me something urgent that I couldn't yet understand. When your only guide spins in circles, you realize that home isn't a place. It's a puzzle, and I was still far from solving it. I pulled out my phone, keyed in the coordinates carved into the wall, and waited for the location to load. It pointed to a storage unit on the outskirts of town. My pulse quickened. This was no ordinary clue. This was a breadcrumb trail, and I was ready to follow. The unit was tucked behind a row of aging warehouses, the kind of place people forget until they need to hide something. The lock was heavy, but it clicked open on the first try, as though it had been waiting for me. Inside, dozens of wedding photos were pinned to the walls, each one haunting in its own right. Brides smiled with wide, forced grins, all wearing the same dress, the dress I'd worn on my wedding day. I swallowed hard, heart pounding louder with each photo I took in. But it wasn't just the dresses that twisted the knife. It was the faces. Different women, different smiles, different lives stolen to fill the same role, the same lie. I wasn't the only one. I was just the latest chapter in a story that had been written over and over again. As I flipped through the photos, a name caught my eye. Tierney and Sons. It was written on a rusted plaque in the corner of one image, barely visible but unmistakable. The alias Jonah had so desperately tried to bury was right here, glaring at me from the past. I could almost hear the echoes, whispers from the walls, screams from the photos, secrets clawing their way out of the shadows. That's when I noticed the initials carved into the back of the photo frames. J.R. But the handwriting was different, shaky, frantic, almost like a confession. The cold air settled heavier around me. Each picture was a reflection of what Jonah, or Noah, had been capable of, each one a cruel reminder that the man I thought I knew was a ghost wearing different faces. And then, just as I was about to leave, I saw a folded envelope tucked behind one photo. Inside was a note, written in the same shaky script. They all looked for home. None found it. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. I wasn't searching for a husband. I was chasing shadows in a house built on lies. I closed the door behind me, the chilling silence following me back to the lake, leaving me with one terrifying thought. Jonah's story wasn't over, and neither was mine. The world seemed to tilt beneath me the day I found out I was pregnant. At first, it felt like a cruel joke, a last twisted thread tying me to a man who was nothing but shadows and lies. But there it was, a small life growing inside me, a fragile heartbeat that refused to be silenced by the chaos around me. I went to the doctor, hands trembling, as I sat in the sterile room, waiting for answers. When the blood test came back, the doctor's face changed, an expression I'd come to recognize all too well. Disbelief mixed with something darker. The father's blood type is extremely rare, she said quietly. Rh null. It's sometimes called golden blood. There are fewer than 50 people in the world with it. My breath caught. Jonah had told me once years ago that his blood was different. He had a secret, he said, but I never imagined it would be this. Sometimes the smallest details carry the heaviest weight. A single drop of blood can rewrite everything you thought you knew. I left the clinic in a daze, clutching the paperwork like a lifeline. But I wasn't done yet. Something about this pregnancy felt like the last piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was trying to solve. When the DNA test on my own blood came back, it didn't make sense. There was a marker, an anomaly that tied me not just to Jonah, but to someone else, someone dead. The report listed a familial marker match. Clara. The woman I'd thought was Jonah's sister, the woman who had vanished without a trace, whose death had been a mystery tangled in lies. Clara wasn't just a ghost in Jonah's past. She was part of my own bloodline. Memories fade, but listeners like you keep them alive. Subscribe and we'll keep remembering together. I sat in my living room, the walls closing in. My mind screamed, trying to make sense of it. How could Clara be connected to me? Why hadn't Jonah ever told me? And then it hit me like a punch to the gut. Clara wasn't Jonah's sister. She was my half-sister. The secret that Jonah had hidden all along wasn't just about his past. It was about my family, my blood, my very identity. He had known. He had always known. The truth isn't always about the person you think it's about. Sometimes it's about the family you never knew you had, and the lies that bind you to them. I remembered the cryptic words Clara had said when she first appeared. Sugar attracts flies. It wasn't just a warning for me. It was a warning for both of us. Jonah's lies had been a poison, spreading through the roots of my family tree, infecting everything it touched. And now, as I carried his child, his blood, and Clara's, I was trapped in a story that wasn't mine to write. But I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Because sometimes the blood ties that bind us are stronger than the secrets that try to tear us apart. And sometimes the only way to break free is to face the darkness, head on. The room felt colder as I stared at the test results again, trying to piece together what this meant for my unborn child. For me. For the legacy of lies Jonah had left behind. I was carrying more than just a baby. I was carrying a history, a tangled, dangerous history, that threatened to consume us all. And the man I thought I loved? He had been playing a game I was only just beginning to understand. But this time, I wasn't the pawn. I was ready to fight. The night the folder arrived, my hand shook as I clicked it open. Adrian's message had been brief but ominous. You need to see this. What unfolded on my screen wasn't just a collection of files. It was a digital graveyard, a mosaic of shattered lives and unanswered questions. Hidden deep within the dark web, the folder contained files no one wanted to see. Old blog entries filled with frantic pleas for help, redacted police testimonies shrouded in secrecy, and photos that made my stomach turn. There were 6 women, 6 brides, each linked to the same man, Jonah, 6 marriages, 6 disappearances, each one ending with an empty coffin, buried under layers of lies and carefully crafted alibis. The pattern was unmistakable. The same twisted cycle I had lived through, played out again and again with other women. Women who had vanished like ghosts. Their stories buried beneath the weight of silence. I wasn't alone. I was the last chapter in a book that had been written over and over, a cycle of love and death stitched together by a man who wore different faces but left the same destruction behind. But the darkest revelation was yet to come. As I scrolled through the files, one name kept appearing. One thread that connected every shattered life. Eleanor Mallory, my grandmother. The woman I had loved, the woman I had believed was my anchor to a simpler past, was tied to this nightmare in ways I could never have imagined. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a part of the bloodline Jonah had hunted, and I was the final piece of this horrific puzzle. My grandmother wasn't the first victim. She was the final one, the last echo before the silence. The folder contained a faded photograph of Eleanor Mallory, smiling softly in a sunlit garden. Beneath it, a note in shaky handwriting. She knew too much. I felt the weight of those words like a hammer crushing my chest. Eleanor had been caught in the same web, trapped by a man who had mastered the art of deception long before I ever met Jonah. The files also contained copies of wills, property transfers, and legal documents, all pointing to a sinister plan that spanned generations. Jonah, or Noah, wasn't just a man running from his past. He was part of a legacy, a curse woven through blood and lies, anchored by my own family. The man I married wasn't just a ghost from one life. He was a shadow that had haunted my family for decades. And now, the truth was closing in faster than I could run. As I stared at the screen, the cold realization settled over me. I was the last Eleanor, the final bride in a chain of women who had all disappeared beneath his hands. And this time, There would be no empty coffin to hide the truth. The past wasn't done with me. It never was. And now, the echoes of those lost wives were screaming through the walls of my mind, demanding justice and vengeance. Because some ghosts don't stay buried. They come back to claim what's theirs. They told me babies don't remember anything, that their little minds are still stitching together the world, like a quilt without corners. But from the moment he was born, I knew mine was different. He didn't cry, just stared. Not in that aimless, glassy way most babies do. His eyes found people, held them, followed them, like he already knew who they were. And worse, like he was deciding who they'd become. The nurses in the delivery room exchanged glances when they first saw him. One even muttered something under her breath before crossing herself. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't have to. I was too busy watching my son look back at me. No tears, no squirming, just recognition. As if he already knew the story, as if he already knew me. By the time he was 6 months old, he could sit up, crawl, and follow voices from one room to the next. But it wasn't until that morning, cold, fog-drenched, the kind of morning that presses on your chest, that I truly understood what I had brought into this world. I was folding laundry in the living room when I realized the silence was too perfect. No babbling, no toys rattling, just stillness. I found him in the hallway, crouched against the wall, dragging his tiny fingernails across the plaster like he was drawing something only he could see. He'd scratched lines, symbols, then letters. One word. Jonah-me hands dropped the towel. The sound didn't startle him. Nothing startled him. He just turned and looked up at me, wide-eyed, unblinking, like he'd been waiting for me to see it. My knees gave out before the scream reached my throat. How could a child who never met him, who never should have known him, write that name? Not just any name. Jonah, the man whose lies were stitched into my blood, the man who'd haunted my body, my dreams, my lineage, the man who should have stayed buried. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. My baby slept like the dead, motionless, soundless, arms folded across his chest, like a little graveyard statue. And then the dream came. It wasn't like the others. It didn't feel like a dream. The orchard was quiet. No wind, no birds. Just the thick, pulsing hum of memory. I stood among the trees, but they weren't trees anymore. They were figures, people, women in dresses, all the same dress, all of them wearing my face. And there, at the center, stood Jonah. He was holding the baby. My baby. Jonah looked younger than I remembered, like the version of him I'd first fallen in love with. His hair slicked back, his shirt buttoned too neatly, like he was trying to hold something in. You can't keep him, he said, rocking the child gently, as if soothing a storm. I tried to move. Couldn't. He doesn't belong to you, Elle, he whispered, eyes fixed on the baby. He belongs to the pattern, the word echoed in my bones. Pattern. Like a curse. Like a prophecy. And then I woke up, drenched in sweat, the taste of dirt in my mouth. I ran to the crib. My son was gone. The scream ripped through the house like a jagged knife through silk. But just as I turned for the phone, something moved in the corner, a shadow, and then he was there. Sitting in the hallway, smiling softly, holding his compass. He looked up at me and said, in a voice far too calm for a child his age, "Daddy says not to worry. He's just waiting for the right time." There are moments in life that bend reality, fold it into something too sharp, too unnatural to be real. That was one of them. And then came the box. It arrived without warning. No truck, No knock at the door. Just there, on the front porch, wrapped in brown paper twined tight like it was holding something dangerous inside. No return address, no postage, just my name, my real name, Ellie Mallory. I brought it inside, didn't open it right away. My hands trembled too much. My breath wouldn't steady. My son watched from the other room, not playing, just watching, always watching. It took me nearly an hour to tear through the layers of wrapping. Beneath it, a wooden box, carved, stained, old. Familiar. I recognized the carvings. They were the same symbols I'd found behind the wallpaper at the lake house, the same ones scratched into the backs of the wedding photo frames. This box didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. Inside, a single item. Jonah's wedding ring, still warm. I dropped it like it had burned me. But even as it hit the floor, something in me shifted. The ring wasn't just a message. It was a threat, a tether, a promise. Because if the ring was here, then so was he. Not just in memory, not just in dreams, but here and worse. Waiting, watching. And through it all, my son didn't blink, didn't cry. He just turned toward the window, pressed his tiny hand to the glass, and whispered, "He's coming." I don't know if it was a warning or a welcome. The lake hadn't changed. The air still smelled like iron and secrets, and the trees still leaned toward the water as if listening to something just beneath its surface. I told myself I was only walking, only revisiting a memory I had buried years ago. But grief and curiosity have the same pulse, and that pulse led me back here. It had rained the night before. The ground was soft, greedy, swallowing my footprints as I stepped closer to the hollow tree that used to hold the tin box where Jonah and I had once left love notes for each other. That was before the lies, before the bodies, before I learned what kind of love digs graves. The bark peeled away beneath my fingers, damp and cold. Something glinted inside. A bit of leather, worn and swollen from years of hiding. A notebook, brown, cracked, sealed with a thin string that crumbled the moment I touched. Jonah's handwriting was the first thing I saw. Slanted, controlled. Too precise for a man who had claimed to hate himself. I never meant to love her. It began. I read that line 3 times before I could breathe again. But the moment she said yes, the next sentence went on. The cycle broke, and so did I. I didn't understand at first. The words blurred. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down in the mud. The cycle. The one he'd always talked about in riddles. The one that seemed to bind the women before me. The orchard. The pattern. Was he saying I'd broken it by loving him? Or that he had broken me trying to stop it? Page after page, his voice came alive in my head. Steady. Remorseful. Too calm for the crimes that stained it. He wrote about Clara. Said he hadn't killed her. Said he had let her die. That she begged him not to help. Begged him to let her go because the pattern needed an ending. He called it mercy. I called it murder in slow motion. Somewhere in the middle of the notebook, the tone shifted. The confessions turned into something else. Almost a love letter. Almost a sermon. She reminded me of the life I was supposed to have before the orchard, he wrote. Before I learned how to bury what couldn't be fixed. Before they gave me the compass and told me which way home was. It was the first time he'd mentioned the they. He described men and women who moved like shadows, who whispered about binding the bloodline to preserve something older than faith. He said the orchard was just one root of a much deeper tree. And then he wrote about me again. I watched her long before she ever saw me. Watched her walk home from school. Watched her sit at her father's grave. Watched her drop her keys that night by the bridge and curse under her breath. I wasn't supposed to feel anything, but she looked at the world like it could still forgive her. I wanted that. I dropped the notebook then. It hit the ground with a dull slap, pages flaring open like a wound. My breath caught somewhere between fury and grief. He had watched me before he ever loved me. He had planned me before I ever chose him. My whole life, rewritten in someone else's pen. I should have left it there. I should have let the rain swallow it whole. But the human heart is addicted to closure, even if it kills us. I picked it up again, turned to the last page. The ink here looked fresher, darker, like it had been written after everything else. Maybe even after he died. "If you're reading this," it said, "then I'm not dead. Just somewhere the truth can't follow." The sentence ended mid-stroke, the ink trailing off into nothing. For a moment, I thought the wind had stopped. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard it, a creak. Soft, behind me, the hollow tree moaned under a new weight. I turned and the shadows bent wrong. Something was moving between the trunks, slow and deliberate, as if trying not to startle me. The air thickened, my skin prickled, and from somewhere deeper in the trees, a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered my name. Not shouted, not called, whispered. "Ellie." It sounded like it was coming from beneath the ground. My son's words came rushing back to me, the way he'd pressed his hand to the glass weeks ago and said, "He's coming." The notebook slipped from my hands again, open to that final page, and I watched as a single drop of water, or blood, I couldn't tell, fell onto the words. The ink bled outward, veins spreading across the paper like roots, searching for something buried. The lake rippled though there was no wind, and in that trembling reflection, I could have sworn I saw two silhouettes standing side by side, one small, one tall, both watching me, both smiling. The rain started again, soft and rhythmic, like fingers drumming against a coffin lid. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough for the edges of the notebook to darken, for the last of the ink to vanish into the mud. But the words stayed burned into my mind, somewhere the truth can't follow. Maybe he was right. Maybe some truths aren't meant to be found. Or maybe he wasn't gone at all. Maybe the truth is still waiting, patient, breathing, and wearing his face. Oregon was cold in a different way. Not the biting chill of the orchard mornings or the metallic air by the lake. It was cleaner here, quieter. I found a town with no memory of me. No graves, no whispers. Just trees that didn't lean, and shadows that didn't watch. We changed our names. I picked ones that didn't mean anything. Blank slates, no blood soaked into them. No legacy curled beneath the vowels. My son didn't ask questions. He just stared out the window like he'd been here before. Like the world, to him, was just something waiting to repeat itself. I rented a little house at the edge of town. Pale blue, 2 bedrooms, a cracked porch that faced the woods. I didn't hang pictures. I didn't bring anything from the old house, not even Jonah's ring. I buried that under the floorboards of a rest stop somewhere in Nevada. No one saw me do it. I made sure, for a while we pretended. We played human. I walked him to school. I worked at a bookstore and smiled at customers. I cooked dinner at 6. I locked the doors at 9. Sometimes, when he thought I couldn't hear, he would hum the tune Jonah used to play on the piano. The same 4 notes, over and over, like a code, or a countdown. He never cried, never laughed either, just watched, quietly, like something was ticking behind his eyes. It was a Wednesday when the package came. Mid-October. Windless. I stepped out to grab the recycling bin and saw it sitting there on the porch. Dead center, perfectly square. No label, no tape. Just a brown paper box. Dry, even though it had rained the night before. I didn't move for a long time. Just stared. My son stood behind me, barefoot. I hadn't heard him come down. "Are you going to open it?" he asked. The words sounded too old for his mouth. I didn't answer. I brought it inside, locked the door, pulled the blinds. The paper peeled back like skin. Inside, nestled in a bed of moss and cloth, was a compass. Silver, small, still spinning. No north, no end, and a note. I knew the handwriting before I read it. Jonah's. Home is wherever I leave the map. I dropped it, Not out of fear, out of recognition, because this wasn't a message, it was an invitation. Behind me, my son began to hum again. 4 notes, over and over, somewhere in the walls. Something creaked, something deep, like an inhale. The compass spun faster. I turned it over in my palm, felt the metal buzz like it remembered me. The house felt smaller suddenly, the sky darker, and somewhere just at the edge of my hearing, I swear I could hear footsteps, coming closer, through the trees, through time, through the pattern we thought we'd escaped. But patterns don't die, they wait. And maps only matter when you're trying to leave. He wasn't telling me where to go. He was telling me I'd never left. Thank you for listening to my little piece of life. If you'd like to sit with me again someday, just subscribe.